My name's James Cabe. I've worked for a lot of cybersecurity companies, but I really began my career back in BBN Planet. Anybody here old enough to remember what BBN is? Yeah, that's actually encouraging. It was Autonomous System 1 on the internet. So we were the internet at the very, very beginning, before MCI WorldCom and before a bunch of these other ones. It was Barnet, Nearnet, Surenet, you know, all the conglomeration of the schools. So back then we were actually using ancient Cisco serial consoles to do a whole bunch of stuff to actually go around automation and access to the actual frameworks that we were actually using to make sure that things were out of band, because the military really required us to, because at that time the MailNet was actually traversing that particular network. So you know, my career's, I've been in cybersecurity. I was actually worked for Fortinet for nearly 10 years. I worked for Microsoft for about 2 in OT cybersecurity with a small startup called CyberX. Got to stick around at Microsoft for a little bit longer until they got tired of me, which is great. Spent a long time in oil and gas and things like that. And I'm a dad, as well as being a really terrible car racer. You know, I found out very quickly race cars spelled the same forwards as going backwards, and so are race cars. So I'm not very good at doing that either. So I don't know what I'm actually good at yet. And once I find out, I'll tell everybody. So, you know, we came up with this idea on the back end. Well, first off, let me, just so I don't get salesy on anybody, because I always worry about that more than anything else, especially at conferences. If y'all want to play along with bingo, I'll actually have a prize for you, a flipper 0 for anybody that wants one, if y'all want to play bullshit bingo along with me. So if anybody gets a bingo today, I'll definitely give you one of those flippers. Just have to come and get it. You have to be the winner though, so I've only got one. But anyways, play along if you'd like, and if I kill myself doing this stuff, let me know. Let's see. So I've been maybe on 200 to 300, somewhere in there, more like the 230 range. So I'm probably embellishing a little bit. Incident responses for stuff like pipelines and oil and gas companies and things like that. I'm usually the cleanup guy on some of those things when I do lots of extra consulting on the side, just to make sure that things can be recovered. And it will typically take anywhere between, I guess MGM only had 10 days, so that was actually pretty quick. I was really impressed with that. But I've been on a recovery that's actually taken a little bit over 370 days, so a full year plus to do a full recovery of a particular environment. I hate to say it, and you hate to see it. Sorry, that was a Scrubs moment. But you know, we're all going to lose every once in a while, and there's not really much you can do about it. At some point in time, you're going to lose. But the one thing that really annoyed the piss out of me for quite some time was people are like, well, automation will fix all of this. You know, yes, occasionally we'll get by, and you know, first it was AI, and now I'm hearing automation will fix all of these sorts of things. And you know, I don't know if that's the case, right? Because it's still, you know, wherever you're launching for your automation from and things that you're doing creates a problem in and of itself. We already saw an entire control plane of an entire company, gigantic company with a huge digital footprint or digital estate get pwned because they actually got into their identity management solution, right? And you're up against a lot of crap. You know, this just is, you know, scraping the surface of it, especially considering the fact that I was actually talking about a bunch of kids in Colombia that were ex-cartel, you know, a long time ago, that were really good coders that I'd met at some of the cybersecurity conferences in Latin America, especially in Brazil. And that was 10, 12 years ago. And now if you've got a startup or something else, like most likely you have a coder in Colombia or some other place like that, these guys are really, really good and have been for very, very long, just like they were in Romania, because they had free education. And if I could stay in and get free education all the time and actually always go to school and get fed, I'd do the same and just learn new ways to do things. And that's essentially what these have had. So they bred these kind of communities where they're essentially light years ahead of some of the coding and capabilities we actually even enjoy here in America. So it's tough. You're up against a whole bunch of problems, people that are motivated. And beyond it being tough part, we always make our own mistakes, right? So there's these assumptions we always make about how things are supposed to be done and what we're supposed to be doing about why we keep failing. So, you know, you can continue doing something over and over and over again the same way with a little bitty tweak, and as opposed to just throwing it completely out. And that's been a problem for for a very long time. So if we keep doing the same thing, like the Transformers franchise, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse, maybe over time, right? So let's see. The failure to understand is probably the biggest problem. Actually going back and people call it navel gazing. I don't really appreciate that. Just doing some self-analysis, because I don't know anybody that's a little bit older, hacker type in here that has actually gone back and done a little self-analysis as you've gotten older and realized that you may be undiagnosed ADD or have some other spectrum kind of issues and stuff like that that you only start realizing later in life. I am unfortunately one of those people that had to go finally before I traveled too much and my marriage fell apart to actually go do some of those things. So I kind of feel for you if that was also your case. So failure to understand the problem is sometimes one of these self-analysis or analysis things that makes it very, very tough. And, disinformation, especially in this world, is only going to make this thing worse and worse and worse as we go down, because people can't really trust, what they're doing, where they're getting their information from, who they're trusting and things like that. There's no immutability or central authority necessarily that gives us all this really good information. So when we're talking about what we're about to talk about, which is isolated recovery environment, one of those central points that you've got to address is how immutable is that infrastructure? How untamperable? How can you make sure that infrastructure that you're actually going to be doing to manage this thing or manage a crisis is also something that hasn't changed or didn't change in the meantime? And that one assumption right there is going to be the biggest problem that everybody's going to be able to overcome, because the thing I'm going to be doing, there's vendor solutions for some of this stuff. Eclipsium is a great one. I've worked with them in the past, and Scott Schifferman's fantastic human being. He's in Houston along with me, where we have SAINTCON, and it's a great conference. I actually am so impressed by this one. So thanks, SAINTCON, for having me today. This is the first time I'm speaking here. That I've just really enjoyed this one, particularly even better than SAINTCON this past year, where I spoke again over, not this one, but something relatively similar. This is the first time I'm giving this talk, so pardon me if I ramble a little bit. I'm a little unpracticed on this one. But going back to the immutability of what you're deploying, that ends up being the biggest problem. That's one of the reasons why serial consoles and things like that were so just stock standard in what they do, But as we've seen this attacks on IoT and people much more interested in actual electronics hacking and even OS hacking, even on the firmware level, where you'll get a JTAG interface on something and reverse engineer it and do a bunch of really, really fun things with it. So all of a sudden your power bars that run TCP/IP, well, they're a problem, right? Your serial consoles, well, they're a problem because someone went to go and change the firmware on it to have something in it. Same could be said for industrial control systems and a bunch of other stuff. So and I hate to say this, a hardware hacking community, which this one seems to be very, very good at, one of the best hardware hacking communities I've seen, probably because of badge life stuff. The better that's been getting, the worse some of these assumptions behind cybersecurity, especially the stuff we've always been able to trust, like out-of-band consoles and things that have become quite a bit of a problem. And the other problem is we simply don't patch enough. Anybody want to guess what the average time, this is something my company that I currently work for paid for from Ponemon and Gartner, and they got the same number. So it makes me wonder where the data sources for them are coming to as well, but I digress. Anybody want to guess the number of average patch time for most of this stuff?
205 days.
Oh, it's on there, damn it. So I knew I didn't practice this one that much. So yeah, it's 205 days on average. I thought I had the bullets going down, but oh well, whatever. So, this is the problem with doing your slideshow at the last minute, and of course having ADD as an adult, trying to finish up the slides afterwards and thinking you forgot everything. So, but it's 205 days on average. That's ridiculous amounts of time for a patch that may be a 10 out of 10 or a 9.8. Does anybody remember how many we've seen the 9.8s or just in the 9 territory recently that we've had that have come out? 28, just the last month. So, the Nemesis guys that were up here just before mine, that is a good example of where a lot of the C2s and data analysis have gone. They're much faster at actually knowing what the vulnerabilities are and stuff that you've never seen before. I guess people used to call those 0 days, but it's just stuff that's actually fairly new tactics and techniques that actually would be very, very hard. And we're not even doing anything against the end days. So it's not your fault. That's what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to take a little bit of shame out of getting pwned. And that's one of our biggest problems, is that's another assumption that we have whenever we get owned, pwned, whatever you want to call it, that we're ashamed that this happened to us. And that's one of the things that you just cannot do anymore to yourself, going back to the self-analysis piece about what to do when you do get ganked, right? Because it's going to happen. How's it going to happen? If you don't think it's happened already, there's plenty of people that would tell you it's already done. And it's because you're really up against an economy, right? We've never, until maybe 10, 15 years ago, were we up against an entire economy, and it's only gotten worse. What's Bitcoin nowadays? 33,000 per? Something like that. It just popped up 20% just the other day. There's reasons for that, right? Especially if we've actually now entered a third war, maybe a fourth war, in amongst all the other stuff. So there's also numerous places to get a lot of this stuff if someone's trying to attack you, and ways to hide information. So these are just some of the ones that were just in the recent past, and there's many, many more. I could actually list many, many other layers to where I'm finding a lot of stuff that will pretty much kick your butt. There's all the playing levels that you can actually go into. Essentially, it's a classification from a lot of people that have done this for a long time, where you can actually find some of the worst things on the web. So if y'all want to take a picture, more than welcome. But this is really the classification system that you can actually find a lot of stuff in. And oddly enough, level 1, 0, and level 1 is usually all, maybe level 2, 3 is all people really need. Just a good Google dork to get inside your company. So I probably belabored the point right now. So what's the, I guess this is a slide, the places to go if you feel dark, tour taxi. Okay, that's a little bit helpfulness. So there we go. There's the sites I have. So if anybody wants to go take a picture of that too, that's some of the ones that I've collected. I will make this slideshow publicly available. Actually, I'm going to go put it on my GitHub that I'm going to tell everybody to directly after this to release it. Because the one thing I want to do is make this isolated recovery environment completely, utterly open source. And so you can go build it yourself if you choose to, because I think this is the one thing that we're missing still when we start getting into how to do it and things like that. It's the one thing that the recognition of you're going to get caught, you're going to get ganked. What do you do now? And how fast can you recover? And I think everybody used to talk about in the sandbox days. Oh yeah, they have to expend themselves on our automated sandbox does all this, and then all of a sudden we found Sandbox Escaper and all those people just came up with a great way to get around all the problem. And sure, you could disconnect the internet. I see people all over LinkedIn, all over X or Twitter or whatever you want to call it now, Mastodon, everything. Just disconnect the cable. You go for it, right? There is literally, and I've been in industrial control systems cybersecurity for a while. When they say air gap, I always get a good giggle. It always forms right here in the diaphragm. I giggle a little bit because there is no such thing as an air gap anymore for any organization. It just simply does not exist, especially if you allow people with cell phones anywhere near those other computers. It just doesn't work, right? So, small little anecdote before I get into it. I was at a very, very big fizzy soda water company down in Mexico, where literally the company handles a third of the logistics for all food for the entirety of Mexico. And that is, millions and millions of people where they get their food from. A third of what they do is logistics for food for that entire country, right? We were down there and we found something inside their ICS systems, and they're like, wait, it's air gapped. And I'll be honest with you, it was super duper silly, because the one cable that went out to the industrial control system was like literally this really, really thin, and not a modern one, thin Ethernet cable. And I was like, oh, I know what that is. And I followed the Cat3 all the way back to the switch, and it was a light tan switch, right, that said DEC on the front. So I was like, that's not even Ethernet, that's DECnet. And so it was VAX controlling everything, but it was causing problems with the VAX system to be able to blow, there's a furnace for bottles and doing all this other kind of stuff. And there was causing problems with it. What did I find? I went in there, I set a camera, a GoPro in there without anybody knowing about it. Later on, people came in. The first thing they did is take a USB stick and poke it in those old Windows 98 workstations, right? Got up on UltraSurf that they had Wi-Fi to another place in the plant, and they were actually surfing through their other work computers during their shift by using UltraSurf to get out. So there's no such thing as air gap. And this was the employees that aren't really that technical. So this is going to happen regardless of whether you like it or not. So what is an isolated recovery environment? Well, it depends on something I want to call a resiliency system. Now, there are lots of companies out there that say, we're a resilient system and stuff like that. Carnegie Mellon, anybody ever read, anybody from, keep up with anything going on Carnegie Mellon? There's a really, really cool guy named Firesmith, that's his last name, and I think should be the next Marvel comic hero. That is a cool ass name. So Mr. Firesmith has actually written a lot on resilience systems themselves and how they're built. And I think he's probably got it the most key out of anybody else. But the biggest problem that everybody has is actually crown jewel identifiers for their network. So, or their entire system that they've actually put in place. So what's a crown jewel? DNS, right? You know, as soon as your DNS server goes down, everybody's like, I can't get to the web, the network's down. No, it's not, it's just your stupid DNS server, someone decided to reboot during production, right? So DNS, definitely a crown jewel. DHCP, definitely a crown jewel. There's some routing pieces to it too. There are, authentication servers and things like that. These are the crown jewels of the network. Unfortunately, some of these during the recovery aren't really prioritized. We saw that actually recently, and I hate to pick on them, the MGM hack, where they did not watch their proxy servers very, very closely until all of a sudden it was the last minute and they got yanked away from them, and then they were too late to unplug them, and then everything else all went to hell, right? So one of the biggest problems is, industrial control system cybersecurity has been doing this crown jewel assessment thing for a long time. One of the things we don't do is that crown jewel assessment, but to know what the the very littlest necessary to actually operate a network and continue services for the people that you're doing the work for, right? So what do they actually need to what they currently have? They can have all these file share things and everything else like that. None of that really matters unless it's identified as a crown jewel for people to get their work done. And that's unfortunately a lot of human interaction to figure that out. And that's one of the things we're just not very good at. So that actually requires a questionnaire as part of a resilience system, is actually the human factor of the whole thing. And that's tough for us. Now I have one of those things, that I'll be posting up to my GitHub as well. Just a couple questions to make it really super simple. But the idea behind a resilience system at its core is not disaster recovery. It is not backup. Because what does a backup do, or like a DRP site? What is actually a DRP site? You took a bite. I'm going to pick on you then. Anybody? DRP site? It's usually an exact copy of the thing that just got owned, and they have access to each other. I mean, typically I'll even see L2 networks between the two of them just to make sure the data can get copied over. Well, that doesn't sound like it's a very good disaster recovery plan, at least not from a cyber attack. And I'll tell you, I've even wound up with issues in hurricanes and tornadoes where stuff just got scraped. Didn't exist anymore. It was actually causing routing issues on a network and actually thus taking it down, just because they were actually, there was a big OSPF run that was actually making some of the routers go nuts. So I've even run into some of the stuff like that, right? So what do you need to actually keep a site running? And that's where that cockroach idea comes in. What do you need to survive? And cockroaches survive because they hide in the walls. So while you may not be able to be disconnected or air-gapped from the network, you can certainly be removed from it in a very meaningful way, whether it's over serial or USB or something else like that, and having a secondary connection that doesn't require a network. So if you do have to clip off the network and the TCP/IP, you can still remain operational. So you got two qualities there, right? One, it's got a minimum level of capabilities to be able to keep you running and going. And the second one is that you actually have some way to get to the devices other than the network that they're operating on, because you can never trust the network. During an attack, you can actually deploy all the NDRs, all the next generation firewalls in the entire world. And unfortunately, because something's going through TLS and you're not breaking the TLS on the network because the flows are too big or something else is going on, you still can't trust those channels, to the point of what we just saw from Nemesis about what they're doing to just download files willy-nilly over your own network. So then the next thing you need is actually the thing to be able to start the recovery. And portion of that is just, can you automate the bring up of your tools, make it instantaneous, turn on the device, have it either cloud in it if you're going to be using VMs, have it use Docker Compose if you're actually using containers, and have the tools readily and accessible available. So as soon as you drop that unit and connect it into the back end of a lot of your stuff, can you start recovering the environment or lock it off, knock certain things off the network and still have physical access to them in other ways, right? So, and a lot of that has to do with how you actually deal with PCAPs, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is what that would actually take, right? So I've gone into a lot of that stuff already about resilience. Sorry about that. Like I said, I haven't practiced. What does it actually mean to have something like this isolated recovery environment? So the first thing I'm going to do is rip out the cords to everything. I hate to say it, I'm going to turn off the switch, I'm going to turn off the router, I'm going to turn the site completely off. And as I go through the analysis of each one of the computers, as I actually have them, I'll actually be able to run my static analysis tools and network analysis tools in their own separate environment, either over out of band or a brand new VLAN that I bring them up on the switch that I've actually completely created new networks for, that I can move the hosts that I'm analyzing over in an automated fashion. I've got a timer for it as well in some of the Python code I actually wrote on the GitHub, right? So it actually moves it over, and if something isn't done in the proper amount of time, you have to go back and recheck it again to make sure it is. So one of the things that it enables you to do is, okay, this thing did this, it goes back and checks the script to see that this thing's been completely analyzed, it's clean, okay, put it back over here, right? Now go ahead and move it onto the clean network. That doesn't mean you can't stop monitoring the clean network, that something's not sticking around or not resident, but you can actually go back and actually make sure that one thing doesn't have the current bug that it's got on it, because we ran the SAST or DAST or the network analyzer on it to make sure that it is indeed recovered. And that's an automated function, right? That you have to go back and haul it back if it's not. And the reason why we ran into that is because when you go drop this, say you create a unit, and I'm gonna get into how to physically do this stuff, in this slide, about actually how to come up with a NIFO box, which is essentially what I'm calling it, nuke it from orbit box, which is to completely wipe out an entire environment and then recreate it from either backup or you'd be able to move clean hosts that you've already made sure of using your own tools to actually make it work. And all this is completely open source. I literally used Ubuntu Core 22.1, I think it was, network manager, KVM, using Virt Manager, and make ISOFS, which is just the cloud init functions, to be able to do them automated, to be, as soon as this thing boots up, everything gets created dynamically from an encrypted storage disk that I actually have in the unit itself. So there's an Israeli company that sells these little bitty things called Fitlet 3s. Really, really like it, because you can order it with the TPMs actually having certificates that you could deploy on the TPM using one of their tools, and then you can encrypt the disk and then only keep the keys on the TPM, so nothing else has the keys. You delete the seeds and everything else like that, and the disk has crypto on it, that if they got physical access to the box, then they might be able to do something with the UEFI BIOS, but besides that, nobody's going to be able to unencrypt that disk. So some of the stuff remains. Remember what I said, the thing being immutable? Well, most of my tools are then encrypted on that disk to make it completely 100% immutable. When I bring it up, I know that none of the hashes have changed on any of the VMs I've created, all the automation's there, and it comes up without anybody actually physically having to touch the box. And that's one of the key features of the box itself, is the fact that really, if we're gonna do this right, and we're gonna do this at scale, that you can't really need to go out to every one of the sites and touch the box. It needs to have its own cellular in it, to where you're not using your own WAN links if you don't need to. And it needs to have either USB over serial or actual serial ports that you can directly connect to the boxes, just like we used to do with the old out-of-band consoles. And enough networking where you can actually change, you can have management plane separation from the actual network that you're actually controlling the thing from, as well as the data plane, so you can actually do your file analysis, so you can do your NDR analysis, and so you can actually crawl everything with a scanner to make sure that that it doesn't have a C2 port open somewhere or something else like that going on. Especially once you've segmented these things like this in an isolated recovery environment, one of the things you're going to notice is it's actually extremely much easier, because of the noise usually generated out of an attack, that it's much easier to find this stuff, especially if it's generating network traffic and finding the ominous stuff that you do that you have to go break the TLS for. Once you separate these things and you start building on them, then you can actually create, just using Grass Marlin or one of the other scanners that is open source as well. You can actually create a nothing more than just hey, is this thing generating more traffic than it should? There's a simple rule that you drop in using regex that actually says, hey, look, this one's generating a lot more traffic than this other one is over this weird, weird TLS port. maybe you go check that particular host again and you rip it back off the network, put it back over to the other side just by issuing some serial commands, or if you're slick enough, just by having a CLI piece that moves the port from one VLAN back to the bad VLAN again, right? So these pieces and how to build it are actually going to be up in the GitHub as well, because I want to, like I said, open source the whole thing and enable people to build it. Now, you don't have to go with the Fitlet 3. There's only one reason why I like this one very, very much, is it's tiny. It's about that big around, right, that you can ship. It's got cellular directly in it on an M2 card that you can even make 5G if you're not worried too much about heat. That's one thing I ran into with the 5G cards and preferred 4G instead, was because the 5G cards just generate a crap ton of heat. Some of them even have their own heat sink and fan on top of the M2 card, if you can believe it. So, excuse me. So I kept it to 4G LTE, and then I had two of the interfaces dedicated to the management networks, and then two of the other ones dedicated to the actual data plane. One is a scanner that could actually speak outwards, and the one that was just a essentially wiretap report mirror to take the data in for using different types of tools for your network analysis. And this was good enough, even with the little bitty Atom processor that's in it, and I think it's a P6000X, it was good enough to actually get about 100 megabits per second in just deep packet inspection, which is pretty damn good for a box its size. So if you have stuff that runs over 100 megabits per second, you can upsize the box. You can go get yourself a Super Micro or an Advantech or something else like that that's got a beefier embedded Xeon in it or something along those lines. It also has the M2 cellular cards. Lots of options out there in case you want to go build your own. The big piece about this, other than the toolkit that I have out there with a bunch of the automation for the cloud in it, and the Docker Compose, which is part of the list, right? Creating a Docker Compose and a KVM, a make ISO FS or cloud init file for each one of them to automate the bring up of them. The big thing, the focus of the isolated recovery environment is actually having a jump box. Who in the organization has a Bastion host or jump box, that they use internal to the organization? Couple truth tellers, right? All right. So every one of the pen testers I know go after that box. It's the first one they go after, and for a good reason. It's got all the yummiest tools on it. It's got all the best logins. You pwn that box and you're good. So if you can find that box and it's actually not as hard as you think it is, then you've got most of the organization, right? So there is, and I meant to change the symbol in the middle, the focus of actually being able to provide services directly at the site to reduce some of the risk is actually have this box readily deployable or actually at a site, even if you're using it for cellular backup and open routing, which you can use pfSense, you can use, any open firewall or router that you actually want to, OpenSense or any of the other stuff, if you want to stay with open source stuff. It's pretty easy to get into and mitigate or reduce the risk just by virtualizing those jump hosts, right? Because the great thing about a jump host is every time you reboot it, before it comes back up again, especially if you're using KVM, you can check the hash on it to make sure it hasn't changed, right? So essentially creating your own version of Black Ice. Anybody remember Black Ice? I know y'all do, right? So, or bringing up the old versions and completely checking it back in, which is just a key inside KVM to actually be able to do that using Virt Manager and say, just revert it back, don't let any of the file hashes change, and then start the thing back up again because it's set in stone, so to speak. The best way to do all this stuff is turning all your tools into a microservice using either Docker or any other kind of OCI type of container D type of image. So if you turn most of your tools into nothing more than a scriptlet that runs on a container, goes up, goes down, all of a sudden you've entered the world of moving target defense without having to pay $2 or $3 million for the endpoint analysis software that you actually have. All of a sudden you're at moving target defense just with that. And you can thank the Simian Army and all the stuff Netflix did around a lot of the chaos engineering that actually made that a possibility. So the cool thing about these little bitty boxes, if you really want to, all you have to do is load Kubernetes on them or even run S3, some of the S3 toolkit on top of Ubuntu on them. You can actually have your own management framework that just is a kube cluster at the very, very top and have individual nodes using S3. Now, I think S3 and MicroK8s are the only two that really do that. So just a thing, if you get a full version of Kubernetes, it's just not going to work. Now, you can make all this really, really stupid easy by using my friends at Portainer. If you wanted to manage all these and all the images on them, just go out and get Portainer and be done. It does IoT management stupidly easy. It's open source, and if you want to start paying for it, it's peanuts, really. And the coolest thing is they actually do stuff for the Ferrari team for F1, so it makes them kind of near and dear to my heart. Nobody give me a hard time about Ferrari. So, so the order of operations for... What is that?
Disqualified.
Oh! So the order of operations, really, we all know is assessment, and the crown jewelry store. The biggest problem is what tools you would use or leverage at that point in time. And I told you, I disconnect the entire network. As soon as I find out something's done or bad, any more those tools, the attack tools like the Nemesis guys were showing you, which is a commercial version of what the bad guys actually have, they're so fast, they're inhuman now. It's no longer they're gonna be sitting in the network for 5 days or 2 weeks or a month or something else like that and stuff. They take action extremely fast now. Some of the pieces I've seen coming over, just working with some old friends at FortiGuard and the CTA, the Cyber Threat Alliance, some of the tool sets now that cull all this information and pull it back are even faster than the downloads you might have seen on the previous. So they get certificates that are just lying in the open. They get signed code that's just lying in the open with code signature, certificates that are just sitting right there on people's desktops. Trust me, once they get in and they get to the right workstations, the right machines, it's pretty much game over. And the only thing that's gonna save a lot of people is actually pulling the plug on almost everything. Had some of these organizations done that recently, like Sony, they would have probably been able to get, fight their way out of it within 1 or 2 days, maybe a couple hours, depending on how automated they had the recovery, as opposed to 10 days or sometimes 30 days for some of this sort of stuff. So the idea is not how do we fight this thing off? It's how do we just, I'd say give up? No, how do we just call the game and then just start the recovery process as quickly as possible? So I think, unfortunately, we're at that point, whether it becomes natural disasters, floods, everything else like that going on, because one of the key things that I'm doing right now when we're dealing with this, I'll work on many of the tools. Some of these are a little out of order. Something I definitely wanted to get, because I'm not running short of time, but I definitely want to talk about. We're submitting for Resilience Village this year at DEF CON. So me and a bunch of friends, and right now I work with a company called, 501c3, sorry, called IT Disaster Recovery Corps, or Center. This group of people actually go out to disaster sites and they provide IT services to the local communities. And why is that a big deal? You say, well, people could actually start filling out their FEMA forms right there on the spot, even though all the cell towers are down, all the communications down and everything else like that. So if you stayed with the local community, whether it flooded or you have a tornado or you have a hurricane, they float these services in. So I got involved with them right after the Puerto Rico incident with the big hurricane that pretty much knocked over everything, and they were down for 6 months. Some people were actually down for multiple years to where they got electricity and internet back again, phone systems and things like that. So we were down there helping them out, and that's when I started getting involved. And the two guys that work with me right now, Roger, who got me into the organization initially, just one of the nicest people. He's involved with B-Sides up in San Francisco, has been in the community for a very, very, very long period of time. He's gonna be my day 3 captain if we do this thing. And part of it's actually gonna be about you getting to go create your own NIFO box. And we'll have the pieces to actually do it with for each one of the teams that actually wants to do this sort of thing. Day 2 captain, Greg Hanneman, who is actually an I don't know what they call the Canadian SEALs, but there's something they do, Canadian Special Forces. He's ex-Canadian Special Forces, and he's gonna be in charge of day 2, which is the disaster day. Day 3 is the recovery day. He'll be in charge of the Wheel of Chaos and the dice of decimation. So we'll be rolling, and you'll get some random incident that's going to happen to you. One that's going to be a natural disaster, and the other one's actually going to be something cyber. So cyber and physical type thing. And then I'll be running day 1, which will be the setup of it. The reason why we started getting involved with this with the IT Disaster Recovery Center was actually because we started having to ship out units to small cities and towns which had no ability to recover from a cyber attack. much less a natural disaster. So that was one of the big requests we got from some of these cities, especially some of the smaller ones that just didn't have the money or the resources to be able to send out to the world or do it with it. So they were seeing 3, 6 months, 9 months to where they were able to recover all their city systems to where the signaling would work on their stoplights, that their water would remain up, because some people didn't, during Shields Up, didn't disconnect their water systems in ICS directly from the city's network, and didn't do a bunch of this sort of stuff. So we found that this has been one of the biggest requirements for ITDRC. Wasn't even going to go do disasters right now. It's actually just helping people recover from cyber attacks. And I think that's a little bit pathetic and bad and terrible. Means there's probably something broken out there, but we're trying to assist the best way we can. And that's really where the genesis of this idea came out of, is how can you help somebody from a distance and be able to do it competently? Because, we all suffer from there's a reason why it was very funny on Saturday Night Live when you had the nerd go in there, go, move, get off the keyboard. So how can you do that remotely over a network, or even be able to provide services to a small community, even if you can't go travel out there? It's just ridiculously expensive. Nerds getting out of their butts out of seat costs lots of money every time we have to do it, travel or do anything else like that. That's one of the reasons why I think conferences are so cool, because there's a lot of nerds getting their butts out of seat to go listen to a bunch of stuff. Oop. Let's see, running the tools. So I have a prescriptive thing that we run for these small cities, and a couple of companies I work for. This is actually pretty prescriptive. It's very, very simplistic. These are the ones that I actually have the automation scripts to be able to bring up and pull down that are going to be available on my GitHub, and then I'll release that a little bit later. It's actually in the slideshow as well. And then I'll post the links actually on my LinkedIn if you want to link me in and check it out as well. Let's see, where am I at now? I was supposed to have an example of all this stuff sitting up here, but the Pelican case did not competently get on the flight, so my apologies. The case I had wasn't dual-sided for the frame, so the nuts on the front end of the servers actually broke off whenever I put it into the luggage carrier, and I saw that really, really quickly, and I was like, okay, I had to go run and put it back in the truck for my wife. So I will have it, I promise, next time I do one of these things, to actually show y'all an example of the actual code running, it coming up, doing an initial analysis and slicing off the network, and be able to run the analysis on the back end on a specialized network that basically segments almost every one of the machines. And it's for 4 workstations, a Active Directory server, and a file share server that you normally see in a small organization or anything else like that. It's my hope that this thing kind of takes off, and the concept actually gets a little bit out there in the wild a little bit more, and the people much smarter than me take off with it and make it a little bit better. So that's pretty much my presentation today. Thank y'all for coming. Hopefully everybody starts doing this stuff as well. So. Any questions from anybody about any of this stuff?
Would you roll back 1 slide? 2 slides. There you go.
So the first thing that I wanted to do was actually secure collaboration. You have to have a war room, and it can't be a war room that anybody's been able to monitor your email or anything else like that. So once you go onto this, you have a clean set of laptops or things like that you're not having part of the organization. It's sort of a break the glass kind of thing. So you've got the laptops that are there, sitting there, not having any kind of authentication or imaging on them. And then you run all the tools from a central repository, which ends up being this immutable device that you have. So the first thing I always bring up is Jitsi or Rocket Chat as part of the war room. So, because everybody has to start communicating and get inbound, you have to document things that other people have done, especially if they're helping you out with the disaster. That actually came from doing that at a disaster site in Florida, doing recovery from a hurricane. That whole system, being able to go in really, really quickly and then set up video chat and everything else like that, sped up operations maybe about 3 or 4 hours to where everybody was communicating and making sure all the networking equipment got up, that the shots for the Yagi antennas and everything else like that got up, and the mesh got created to be able to support the community. So, but being able to create that war room was number one. That was it. That was the very first step. Creating a war room and some unauthenticated, or in this case, you can actually create a shadow identity provider if you actually use the right kind of tools like Bitwarden. And that's the reason why I listed that first with the secure collab, because then you can start re-IP addressing everything, you can start re-passwording everything, and you can actually use Bitwarden to actually do most of it. You can use Netbox as a source of truth as well. That is also open source. I didn't put that on there, but it just popped into my head. Did I answer that slide a little bit? Cool. And then I always go from network analysis to endpoint analysis on almost everything I do, just because I want to see what's in flight in the air, and then I want to cut that off. And the network is, unfortunately, Scott McNeely was always right. The network is the computer. We just got to it a little bit later than he was way ahead of his time. If you cut the network off now, you're literally hamstringing a lot of the malware that's actually out there right now from really getting the entirety of the organization and making your job a lot easier. And then you can automate that sort of stuff. So we've gone from maybe 2 or 3 days to have a full re-network system and stuff like that. If there's a bunch of us throwing in hands, maybe up to 10 days if there's not a lot of us, there's just like 1 or 2 of the people doing the operations for it, down to about a day and sometimes an hour. The reason why I did this is because I'd been helping out some of the hyperscalers with something like their warehouses. And they were actually automating their infrastructure, including the robots, to come up for the entire warehouse within 15 to 20 minutes using a similar, more commercial product that was a little bit faster and had a ton of serial ports for it. So they were able to make their entire warehouse come up clean. There's no firmware or software or OSs on anything. Be able to image everything, refirmware everything, essentially hash it all, make it immutable, and then deploy all the robots within 15 to 20 minutes. So I found that so impressive from the hyperscaler side. Just like the Symbian Army with Netflix, a lot of these really good ideas have been coming out of hyperscale. You just got to kind of make them go down to the Fortune 500 or to the plain people, the plain folks. You got to kind of translate how they're doing things. And that's really where a lot of the ideas came from for this sort of thing, for the zero touch provision stuff, for cloud init. It's all those ideas are, based in moving target defense. It's all based in where the hyperscalers have actually done a lot of the research and work. So.
You mentioned the GitHub. Do you have the link?
It's on there in the presentation. It's right there. Oh. Isolated recovery environment. If you just go look for James Cabe and isolated recovery environment, I think it's the only one like it. And it's really because this is kind of a new idea. It's only half-assed at this point, so my apologies for it. Because it was only me and a couple other people working on it. It was really around disaster recovery more than it was around cyber, but I felt like it applied because of all the small cities we've been trying to help around the cyber stuff. So
thank you.
Hopefully that answers it. So any other questions? All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate you.